Dear colleagues, good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everybody, depending on where you are. My name is Giacomo Bellani from the University of Milan Bicocca in Monza, Italy. Uh, I wish I had attended the ISICEM in Brussels this year, but still it's great to be able to share with you some data and some presentations, and I'm positive we will be together next year. So the title of my talk is Head Helmets to Deliver CPAP. I think this is a topic that gained a lot of attention in the COVID phase, but I will not be speaking that much, not dig that much into the COVID aspects of CPAPs, and perhaps touch briefly only upon those. My conflicts of interest, and I would like to warn you on the fact that I do have some conflicts of interest, some financial conflicts of interest with companies involved in development of helmets for CPAP. But my, I would say, greatest conflict of interest is the fact that I have been using this interface for many, many years, and I'm quite convinced that it can really help our patients in many clinical situations. As many of you are familiar with, the helmet was somehow born in Italy and has been used in our country for many, many years. And to a certain extent, it didn't make it that much outside Italy. This is what you will find in Scopus if you look for helmet and CPAP. Vast majority of papers coming from Italy. So I sometimes make this joke that helmet CPAP is a little bit of an Italian job, but perhaps things are changing a little bit. So for those of you who never saw the interface before, this is a slide that in fact shows what I was alluding to, the fact that perhaps things are changing a little bit. And in this very nice meta-analysis published very recently on JAMA by the group from Toronto, they in fact have shown that although the vast majority of studies on acute respiratory failure compared face mask versus standard oxygen in this very clear and elegant plot, there is a growing number of studies that is in fact focused on the use of helmets. And so what are helmets? Basically, helmets are what they are a hood, a plastic tent with two holes, one for the gas inlet and one for the gas outlet. Now, the point is what you connect to the helmet. As we are delivering non-invasive ventilation, you would be tempted to connect a ventilator, which is something we can do, as I will show you, but it's not what I would recommend to start with. In fact, there's a very simple way to deliver CPAP with helmet, which is based on just the application of a flow generator. It can be pure oxygen, or it can be blended with medical air, or even more simply, we can just use a Venturi device to drop the FiO2 and increase the fresh gas flow, which is a key point in the helmet. And then you have a PEEP valve. It can be as simple as an AMBU PEEP valve, as I'm showing here, or something a little bit more complex with a better pneumatic performance, but still a very simple valve. So you see, you do not have electricity, you do not have ventilator, you do not need much more than a fresh flow of gas and a mechanical and a valve able to keep the pressure in the helmet stable. Now, is this such a simple system effective? Yes, it is, as I will show you, provided that we keep a good flow in the helmet. It must be at least 40 liters per minute, not because the patient breathes 40 liters per minute, but because we need to wash out the CO2 which the patient otherwise would inhale back. And as you see here in this study by my friend Niccolò Patroniti, if you do not flush the helmet with an adequate flow of fresh gas, you will end up by having your patient inhaling, rebreathing CO2, and increasing tidal volume to fight this. But once we have achieved this, then CPAP is very effective. This is I would say, rather old study where it was compared the efficacy of helmet versus face mask to deliver non-invasive ventilation. And as you see, helmets shows his great I would say his best characteristics, which is the fact that it's very well tolerated by patients. There is no pressure on the face, and so patients are normally able to keep helmets for a much longer period of time than face masks. And in terms of clinical benefits, there are a number of studies that I cannot show in 12 minutes, but showing that helmet CPAP, just CPAP, not pressure support, is very effective. For example, this is a study again from Italy showing in patients with community acquired pneumonia that CPAP was effective in improving oxygenation and hence dropping the need for intubation and invasive mechanical ventilation as opposed to only face mask oxygen. Uh, and in another disease, which is acute cardiogenic pulmonary edema, we know that non-invasive ventilation is very effective, but again, the effect seems to be due to the presence of a positive airway pressure rather than the presence of pressure support. And indeed, the effect of um, the CPAP on mortality is more or less the same as pressure support. Yet, sometimes we might want to use the helmets to deliver pressure support ventilation, and hence we might decide to connect our helmet with a mechanical ventilator, sorry, which should be set in pressure support ventilation mode. I would discourage you to connect the helmet to a ventilator set in CPAP mode, and I will explain you why. Now, this is, in my opinion, not the best way to use the helmets, because if you really want to deliver pressure support ventilation, if you want to assist the ventilation of the patient, you need something which is fast. You need a fast ventilator, but you also need a fast responding system. And helmet is not that fast because of its large volume. It takes a while to become pressurized. And so you see, this is our own unpublished data that show that there should be an animation here. Yes, uh, you have that the pressure delivered by, let's say, generated by the patient starts here. There is already some flow which is not coming from the ventilator, it's coming from the volume of the helmet itself. But it takes a while for the ventilator to realize that the patient is starting to inhale, because the helmet is acting as a high compliance, so damping all the excursions in the systems. So yes, we can provide pressure support ventilation, and it has been done. It works, but you are more delivering, I would say, an average positive pressure ventilation rather than a fast responding pressure support. You might have issues, as I said, with synchrony. You might have issues with CO2 rebreathing because you will not be able to deliver a very high fresh gas flow in the system. And most importantly, don't get scared. You will read huge tidal volumes on your ventilator, like 1600 ml, but those are not the tidal volumes of the patients, are the tidal volume of the helmet. And every time I give this talk, some colleague, typical Italian, comes to me and say, well, but you shouldn't be saying this because you can do pressure support with helmet. Yes, but it's not exactly what the helmet was designed for. And in fact, if we take a look at the comparison between helmet and face mask in the ability to to correct pH or to drop pCO2, I would say that helmet does not outperform face mask, and if anything, it's making things a little bit worse. So hypercapnia and helmets are two concepts that do not cope together very well. Still, uh, this is the study, I would say, that for the first time brought back the attention to the helmet and to the potential clinical advantages of helmets over face mask non-invasive ventilation. This is a very nice study by the group of JP Kress, showing that in patients with ARDS, and you can give an entire talk whether you should use non-invasive ventilation or not in patients with ARDS. But to make a long story short, above 150 millimeters of mercury of PF ratio, I think it's quite safe to use NIV. Not that I think this, that data are showing this. So this group has shown that if you deliver non-invasive ventilation with helmet, the chances of your patients being intubated are lower than face mask non-invasive ventilation. And to reinforce this, the recent meta-analysis published, I already alluded to, by Ferrero and colleagues, show that face mask non-invasive ventilation outperforms standard oxygen treatment in the treatment of acute respiratory failure. This is based on a sample of 1,700 patients. And that helmet non-invasive ventilation is associated with an even lower odds ratio of on the risk of this is mortality for intubation is the same. Of course, you have to be aware of the fact that here the numbers are much smaller, so a word of caution of this. In conclusion, as my time is over, this is my clinical practice. If I face patients with an hypoxic problem, my goal is mainly to increase mean airway pressure. I would just go with a CPAP helmet, no worries of patient ventilator interaction, just free flow and the PEEP valve. But if my issue is hypercapnia or fatigue, I think what we want to achieve is a work of breathing reduction. And at that point, my choice would be for a pressure support ventilation with a face mask. And hopefully also, thanks to this recent evidence, the helmet will not be a little just an Italian job, but a little bit more of a Cinderella story with an hopeful happy ending. Thank you very much for your attention, and please send me your questions.